I am about to make a slightly outlandish claim. I I actually believe that Charles just gave one of the most consequential interviews in the history of Cardano. The reason I think that is that I think he has laid out a persuasive case that we actually have the roadmap as to how Cardano is going to win. I think he laid out the future of all of Cardano, and we're going to talk about it. If the only roadmap you care about is the one that leads to those sweet, sweet Lambo ducats, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, hear me out, guys. I think the interview that Charles gave today may have been I honestly think it may have been one of the most consequential interviews in the history of Cardano. I know that's a tall order because Charles is not a man who shies away from interviews. But I think the things he said in this interview are probably some of the most important things that he's ever said about the future of Cardano. So what interview am I talking about? For those of you who haven't seen it, my hat is off to Crypto Crow. So Crypto Crow has cultivated this relationship with Charles, and somehow it's culminated to date in this interview where Charles seemed to be more candid, less calculating, more transparent than we've ever seen him before. He said things about the IOG Cardano Foundation feud that we'd never heard before. I knew it was going to be a good interview when he was getting down to some historical things that, a lot of people in Cardano probably know about, but we've never heard Charles openly discussing these things. That's not what we're going to talk about in this live stream. We're not going to talk about any of that stuff. I think Cardano has plenty of drama. We don't need to talk about the drama, and that's not the important part of this interview. What was great is after he was able to kind of lay out his side of the whole story, the whole, whatever we want to call the troubled interactions between the CF and IOG over all these years. And I'm not even interested in, laying any kind of judgment on that whole thing and what's gone down there. Who cares? We've got more important business to take care of. After he got through all that, though, I think he kind of got this whole thing off his chest, and all of a sudden he started talking about what I think is the most important thing for all of our futures. And I'm going to sort of lay this out piece by piece, because if I just come straight out with the TLDR, it's not going to make as much sense as if I lay this out piece by piece. So let's talk about this first. So one of the most interesting things Charles said early on in this interview, and by the way, you should all go watch this interview. Crypto Crow did the best Charles interview ever. And he did it by just asking questions at the right times and asking the right questions and just letting Charles go. And he's cultivated the right kind of relationship over all these years with Charles, that Charles was comfortable giving him the real info, very transparent info. So my hat is off to Crypto Crow. Very commendable interview. You should all go watch the interview on Crypto Crow's channel. You can see here it was like simulcast, I think, on Charles's channel. So this is the version that was on Charles's channel. I'm sure there's a version on Crypto Crow's channel. You should go watch it on his channel. But the things that were discussed, I think, are so consequential. I'm not going to talk about everything they talked about, so you should go watch the interview on Crypto Crow's channel. But some of the stuff was so consequential, I think we need to talk about it. This needs to be discussed inside the Cardano ecosystem, so I don't feel bad at all talking about the things they discussed, because I think it's important for all of us. So let's lay this out piece by piece, though. First of all, Charles pointed out something very important, and this is a big part of the theme of what we're going to discuss. And that's that there's a reason for this chicken and egg problem we've been having with Cardano DeFi. So I've talked about this many times over the last week on these streams. It's sort of like we don't have enough users of our Cardano DeFi platforms to entice, a lot of stablecoin liquidity or tier one stablecoin or whatever is the stablecoin cure-all you think, or people in the Cardano ecosystem think is going to cure all of our DeFi lack of TVL woes. And at the same time, we're sort of like, if only we could get that stable coin, but it's like, we can't get the stable coin because there aren't enough users, and there aren't enough users in some people's minds because we don't have a tier one stable coin. So chicken and egg problem. Charles pointed out something very interesting about this early on. And it's something we've all talked about a million times, but it's easy to forget. When we look at the DeFi Llama TVL numbers, right? We see numbers like this, and we're not going to look at the bridge TVL numbers because they're, there's different metrics you can look at, but let's just look at the DeFi TVL numbers. Ethereum has 86 billion. Next in line, Solana, 11.363 billion, right? Charles asked the most important question, or his comment brought up the most important question. What is the true TVL of Cardano? The true TVL of Cardano, everybody knows I hate that metric, but we're talking about that metric. The true TVL of Cardano is actually mainly composed of the amount of ADA being staked. And I forget what Charles pegged that number at currently, something like, 12 billion. And you notice where that would actually put us on the chart. And he pointed out fairly, something we've talked about before on this channel and ad nauseum throughout Cardano. DeFi Llama and everybody else who tracks TVL, they seem to not want us to count our staked base layer assets in TVL, even though they let Ethereum do it. What is the rationale? Of course, it's because we have self-custodied staking. It's not actually locked because it's self-custodied. This is the most ridiculous argument ever because it's like we're being punished for our staking being better. It's objectively better, just given the current, whatever it was the other day, 41-day queue to withdraw your staked assets on Ethereum. Objectively, 0 days, 0 minute queue is better than a 41-day queue. Objectively, our staking is better. Because we don't have this withdrawal queue, because the assets aren't locked, these entities that are tracking this kind of thing argue that Cardano staked assets shouldn't count towards our TVL, even though Ethereum's does. But you notice if that number 12 billion is correct, and I didn't look at today's, count, the percentage of ADA that's staked versus the percentage that's out there in the public float. But if it is 12 billion, you notice that would actually put us in second place on this count right here. Again, the bridge TVL number is quite different, but even on the bridge TVL number, we'd still be pretty high in the chart. And we're going to talk about something that sounds an awful lot like bridge TVL in just a second. But this is part of the problem. The whole blockchain ecosystem has decided that Cardano staking doesn't count as TVL. So we don't even show up on this list. Look, what am I down to? 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I don't even know. Oh, there we are. 24. We're clear down here at 24. They show a number of 283 million. We would argue the number is actually something like 12 billion if Charles's number was accurate during this interview. This is part of the actual problem. Cardano staking is too good. It's too good. It's too high security. It's too good a compromise on the blockchain trilemma. So people have a good reason not to lock their assets in Cardano. And that's because they're already locked in staking. Only they're not really locked. The staking protocol in Cardano is so good, you don't actually have to lock them to get that yield in Cardano. The current yield you get from staking. So people don't lock their assets very often in Cardano because we've got this natural unlocked protocol that serves the same purpose for a lot of people. And true, the yields are very different, across various actually locked DeFi platforms, even in Cardano versus our native base layer self-custodied staking. But still, a lot of people aren't locking their assets because you don't have to in Cardano. Our protocol is already great. So this is kind of the first thing. We've got this huge problem. Cardano staking, because it's self-custodied, is awesome. A huge percentage of the community does it. And it's sort of a disincentive because we have that baseline native, I'm going to call it a low risk yield, at least, low risk in terms of Cardano risk. crypto risk, it's pretty low risk. So there's a huge incentive to do something else besides locking your assets. And it unfortunately pushes us down to number 24 in this list. And Charles pointed out in this interview that as part of his midnight activities, he went around and talked to all the big VC firms. He talked to the A16Zs. He talked to ARK. He talked to all the big VCs. And he said, what they care about is total value locked and average monthly users. When he asked them, what is it you guys care about? What is the metric? How do we be judged meritorious enough to get some of your sweet fiat ducats? And their answer was, what we care about is TVL and monthly users. And in Cardano, we don't even show up on this list because they're not counting our biggest source of sort of activity in the blockchain, which is staking. A huge amount of Cardano assets are actively being staked in the blockchain. Those aren't counted as active as average monthly users or active monthly users or any kind of monthly user because you just stake and it works. You're participating in the blockchain. You're participating in pools that help validate every single block that goes into the Cardano blockchain. At least whoever is delegated to the pool that validates that particular block on that particular in that particular slot on that particular day. But it's a very important form of participation in the Cardano blockchain as users. It's the primary thing we all do. It doesn't even count. It doesn't count for TVL. They're not counting those as monthly users. It completely screws us on, according to the VCs, the only metrics they care about. We show up as number 24 down here. Look at this. Look at our company in between 18 and 33, 34, 35. None of this makes sense. So Charles went on to say a lot of interesting things before we get to the punchline here. So he said they went to token 2049. I think this changed his opinion of how events should be run. And this kind of ties into the bigger theme here. He said at token 2049, the cost for Cardano to do all the things it did, for IOG to do all the things it did for Cardano at token 2049 was 1/3 of the amount they have previously been spending on the additions of Rare Evo. And token 2049 had 29,000 people. It wasn't a Cardano event, but Cardano took it over. Even the password for the Wi-Fi was input output. I think Charles realizes a much more effective way to reach out to the greater crypto ecosystem. So he said next year they'll do the same with Consensus, Abu Dhabi Finance Week, the Bitcoin conference, and token 2049. And it sounded like that was instead of Rare Evo. Don't quote me on that last part, but it sounded like he was saying they were considering doing that instead of Rare Evo because each of those events has 25,000 people and a lot of people outside the Cardano ecosystem, and they cost about 1/3 of what IOG has been paying for Rare Evo, if I understood correctly. Obviously, if you're IOG, you want to get the most bang for your buck. It sounds like the most bang for their buck as far as reaching out to other ecosystems, doing these other events. So then he got to what I think is actually the consequential part. So I wanted to get in those two little bits because I think they're interesting, but here's the consequential part. Charles spent a huge portion of this interview responding to an important question. Crypto Crow, I commend you, sir. You gave a great interview and you asked the most important question at exactly the right time when Charles felt very comfortable and gave a very transparent answer to it with a lot of detail, much more detail than we've had in the past. So at a certain point in the interview, you see how happy they both are here. They're both very happy, giggly, even just old buddies having a great time on a podcast. Crypto Crow asked a question about Bitcoin DeFi. And here's where it got so consequential. We got a lot of detail, guys, and I think it's really important for the future of Cardano. So Charles said the GM of Bitcoin DeFi at IOG, I assume, is Omar Hussein, and he's scaling up a 19-person team. That's some detail I'd never heard before. Maybe other people knew that, but I didn't know who was actually running Bitcoin DeFi, the Bitcoin DeFi project at IOG. I didn't know how many resources were being devoted to that. I think it's very interesting. We've got one guy and he's scaling up a 19-person team. That sounds great. Very happy to hear that. Charles pointed out the history of this whole Bitcoin DeFi concept is nothing new to him. This goes all the way back to Mastercoin and Colored Coins. He was a part of Bitcoin when those things were going on, and his attention was not lost on sort of Bitcoin's quest from the beginning to achieve more expressiveness. This is a story we've talked about many times on this channel. You guys know it's impossible to get anything done in Bitcoin because you have to get all the miners to point their mining rigs at a fork, and that hasn't been very successful in the past. So you can't quite get anything done. But Charles laid out sort of IOG's approach to this whole Bitcoin DeFi thing. And I think we get into some very interesting territory here that's going to affect all of us. And I think really, I'm going to go ahead and say it. This needs to become the focus of the entire Cardano ecosystem. I'm probably going to screw up and interchange the words Bitcoin and Cardano quite a bit here. So if I actually say Bitcoin, you know I mean Cardano, just imagine I said Cardano. But I think this needs to become the focus of our entire ecosystem, at least for a while. So Charles says, basically, the problem from the beginning is Bitcoin is what it is. You basically have to abide by 3 rules, or Bitcoin is never going to embrace any attempt at Bitcoin DeFi. Because like you pointed out, Mastercoin, Killer Coins, other projects, people have tried this before and it hasn't worked because they didn't abide by these 3 rules, basically. The security has to come from Bitcoin, number 1. 2, the fees have to be paid in Bitcoin. Number 3, the yield has to come back in Bitcoin. And we're going to talk a bit about that word, yield. So I think this is going to become really important for Cardano. So Charles says they've been able to move something from Bitcoin main chain to Cardano main chain and back. So mainnet to mainnet, they've already been able to do that. So technologically, I don't think this was a big mystery. Once the Bitcoin OS guys, the BOS guys, once they announced, this is a big deal even in our ecosystem, especially when they announced that they had validated a zero knowledge proof on the Bitcoin mainnet, that opened up this entire topic we're talking about right here. So Charles and all of IOG were paying attention from the very start. We know that because they seemed as excited as the rest of us. So Charles says them going mainnet to mainnet and back, Bitcoin to Cardano and back, main chain, was done via BitVMX and Taproot and involves a recursive snark on Bitcoin. So you know what recursive snarks are. We've talked about them on this channel. Succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. There's a lot of information. If you just Google snark, you're going to find all kinds of academic papers that can go to whatever level of detail you want, depending on your interest and knowledge of cryptography and zero knowledge proofs, all those things. There are probably whole channels out there that just talk about zero knowledge proofs at this point. Don't ask me what they are. I'm sure they exist. So if you don't know what Taproot is, Taproot's been around for a long time. Charles characterized it in I think a way that's pretty easy for everybody to understand. He said Taproot is kind of like this daily batching protocol. The finality times on Bitcoin famously are so long. So he described it as kind of from the perspective of IOG doing this stuff, kind of as like this thing where you can have transactions going on, and when it's time to bring them back to Bitcoin mainnet, Taproot is going to do this daily batching thing and achieve finality on the Bitcoin base layer, you know. And I think he described it as costing like $2,000 to do that or something like that, some absurd amount. But of course, if you're trying to set up a system for Bitcoin DeFi on Cardano and you're going to do a huge amount of activity over on Cardano with Bitcoin assets and then bring them back, $2,000, per day or whatever, whatever. Don't quote me on that number. You'll have to go back and watch this interview yourself, see exactly how he said it, but it starts to make sense. So here's the problem. And this is the part that I think is so consequential and what probably our entire ecosystem needs to focus on for like the next 2, 3, 4 years. Basically, from now until the end of the next 4-year cycle that ends in 2029, maybe we should just focus on this, right? There will be people doing all the other stuff that we've always talked about, and we'll get into that a little bit. But maybe this should be the big focus of our entire ecosystem. And probably all those other little things we've always done and talked about, those can probably all fit into this. So doing the technical part, going from Bitcoin base layer to Cardano base layer and back, BitVMX, Taproot, recursive snarks, all these things, that's just step one. And that's just how IOG is approaching it. Obviously, BOS has their own approach. Others are going to have other approaches. None of that really matters. What matters is that it's technically possible. But the technical possibility is just step one. Here's the big thing. Charles stressed, we also need to give people a reason to bring their Bitcoin over here. And he described this as, we need a dApp store and an application ecosystem with compelling dApps and yield for Bitcoin to the tune of 5 to 10%. I think this is what we need to do as an ecosystem. We need to come up with a bunch of awesome, compelling, inspiring ways for people to take their Bitcoin from the Bitcoin ecosystem to the Cardano ecosystem, make 5 to 10%, and do awesome, inspiring things. We've been talking about exactly this without knowing we were talking about it ever since the huge Africa push. Do you remember the mystery with the book and the bird, all that stuff? We talked about it so much on this channel, how we were going to, it was obvious, eventually it became obvious. This was all about Ethiopia and discussions that were happening with the government over there and how we're going to put identity for students on the blockchain. Now is the time. Now we have a bunch of assets that can come over to Cardano. And if we can figure out a way to do inspiring, compelling things like that and somehow give those Bitcoin assets some kind of yield, Charles threw out numbers, I think 5 to 10%, which makes sense, makes perfect sense. If we can figure out ways to do compelling, interesting things with their Bitcoin and give them 5 to 10%, this is what we need to do. I think we all need to brainstorm. All of us in Cardano just need to brainstorm how dApps can be built to offer to Bitcoiners, because Charles pointed out the liquidity and the number of monthly users in Bitcoin dwarfs all of the rest of crypto. It's so much bigger than the rest of crypto. Seth Shepard pointed out right here, I am mostly BTC, waiting for some DeFi on ADA. I think he speaks for a lot of people. A lot of them don't actually know they're waiting for some DeFi on ADA, but they're waiting for something to do with their Bitcoin. Let me go through a few comments here before we go on. Good day. Thank you for joining. There is a use case. We won't discuss that use case right there on this channel, but hey, you're brainstorming. I won't fault you for brainstorming. I think brainstorming is good. All right. J Marie is here. Jordan for America is here. Ben Ryan, let's go. Electric Race. Thank you for staking. Sincerely, thank you for staking the stake pool. I appreciate it very much. I do. Miles per hour, 4,500. I don't know if MPH is supposed to be miles per hour, but in my mind, you're talking about going 4,500 miles per hour. I love that. Good evening, OS. Been enjoying these broadcasts. Thank you. I'm glad to hear people are enjoying it. Aram is here. Thank you for joining. Great interview. Yeah, I agree. My hat is off to Crypto Crow. He conducted an excellent interview, and without even saying, he did the smart thing that a lot of interviewers are not good at, and that's not talking when just like very subtly, stealthily guiding your interview subject to the information you actually want them to talk about without them feeling coerced. He did an expert job at this. My hat is off to him. Mission Zambia Stake Pool. Good morning. Good to see you again. Ooh, Ben Ryan, I've been asked this question so many times over the years, and part of it is I have no idea what I would ask the man, and I think I need more practice. I think honestly, I need to practice. I need to practice more so I could do a good job. I would feel terrible if I gave I gave Charles the worst interview in the history of Cardano reviews. I'd feel terrible. So I probably need to practice one day. One day I'll ask him. I don't even know if he knows this channel exists, but one day I'll ask him. It'll probably take like several years of asking until finally he like would come up. I'm sure he would finally come on just to get me to quit asking. So that's probably how I imagine it would go. I would be surprised if he even knows this channel exists, to be honest with you, though. Mr. Lweb CODMS, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. At Cardano, period. Excellent name. Hey, good to see you. My number one DRep. Thank you. If you delegate to the DRep address, I appreciate that very much. Turtle Guy, great. Thank you for joining. Great shows, a great interview. Let's go. Yep, I agree. Again, I can't say enough how much I appreciate Crypto Crow doing this interview, because we learned a lot of new things, and just the direction that IOG seems to be headed in is exciting. I'm gonna start to say this is the most excited I've been about Cardano in a long time after having heard that. So that's the hook right there. That's the buried lead. We need, as an ecosystem, to come up with a bunch of compelling, inspiring dApps. We can do this differently. It doesn't need to be a bunch of super lame technical degen stuff. It doesn't always have to be degen stuff to produce a yield. I'm sure we're going to have a bunch of degen stuff. People are good in crypto. We're good at coming up with degen stuff. My DRep also. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Okay, James says, I believe people will be hesitant, but we'll try with minimum BTC like sats. Then after a while, when people get comfy, ADA equals number 2. Yeah, that's the hope. That's the hope. I think we will gladly take all their Satoshi, but we can do this differently. It doesn't have to all be degen stuff. We can come up with actually compelling dApps. Like Charles talked about all those loans he did in Africa. Remember, it was almost every single AMA. He would make some microloans to Africa. He said, I believe, again, don't quote me on this number, but I believe he said something like 97% of those loans were paid back. And we'll get to that. There's something kind of exciting happening on that front specifically. So Seth says, I want 5 to 8% annual BTC yield. Start with like 10K. Sounds great. Let's make the dApps that make that compelling, not just from this degen, how much yield can I get perspective, but let's do the things where people, where the Bitcoin holder is making their yield, 5 to 8%, whatever it is they need, whatever the market demands. They make their yield, and we're also doing something inspiring, something more than just the DeFi degen stuff. That's not gonna get the people going. That's not gonna get people revved up. People aren't gonna be super amped. Okay, DeFi degens are always going to be super amped to do degen stuff, but your mainstream people, they are not necessarily degens like that. Oh my God, dude, do you know how long ago Crypto Crow's first fight was? I believe you can still see. Several years ago, I watched Crypto Crow's one of his very early fights. It was a long time ago. You're talking about Tom Aspinall. I don't think we're talking about different eras of MMA there. Okay, so let's go on here though. Let's talk more. So here's what Charles is envisioning from sort of a Bitcoin holder user perspective. He's envisioning a toggle switch in Lace where users turn on Bitcoin DeFi, and then from their perspective, they're paying their fees in Bitcoin. They're using Bitcoin DeFi, but it's powered by Cardano and Babel fees. So this was exactly what we've always talked about with Babel fees. We wanted people to be paying their fees from their perspective, paying their fees in their chosen base layers assets, in this case, Bitcoin, without even knowing they're really paying Cardano stake pools in ADA. But Babel fees make that possible. They can pay in Bitcoin. The Cardano stake pools can accept it. And the Bitcoin users never even have to think about the fact that they're actually using the Cardano blockchain. So Turtle Guy, I hope sending you good vibes as well. Adam Olson, yes, I think we both know we're talking about two different eras of MMA there. Crypto Crow is gigantic. He's a gigantic person. He's a gigantic person. Yeah, Ada Fox, glad to be here. Thank you for delegating to the DRep address. I appreciate that very much. So that same toggle, Charles wants that same toggle that I just described for the Lace wallet. He wants the same toggle in the Brave wallet at bitcoin.com and at blockchain.com. This is really smart because that's, as by his estimation, 100 million users. When's the last time we talked about onboarding 100 million users? The last time was never. We have never talked about onboarding 100 million users. In fantasy talk, fantasy discussions, we talked about 100 million users. We've never realistically talked about onboarding that many users. This is actually within the realm of possibility. It's not a fantasy. This is something that actually could happen if we play our cards right, if we come up with compelling use cases, compelling yield for all of those assets. There's more liquidity in Bitcoin right now than all the rest of crypto. All the rest of crypto. It's bigger than all the rest of crypto. And between those wallets, that list of wallets I just laid out, Charles says it's 100 million users. I haven't broken down the numbers, but sounds fantastic. Any portion of that, I think we'd take. He said he's talking to dozens of partners on the yield side of it. He followed that up by saying, we're also talking to the Cardano dApps about how to upgrade them to be Bitcoin native. That little couplet of statements, I think, is more important than a lot of people realized when they first heard this. Because earlier on, when he was talking about I'll just call it a feud, the feud between the CF and IOG, he, sort of, as part of his description of his frustration, said, he was sort of having this hypothetical discussion with, sort of the CF, and, as he does when he's describing his frustrations. And he said, hey, did you go talk to A16Z? Did you go talk to Aave? Did you go? And he named a couple of DeFi platforms that are outside of the Cardano ecosystem. You should listen to this on Crypto Crow's channel yourself and see if you agree with what I'm hinting at here. So he said, coming back to this part of the video, he said he's talking to dozens of partners on the yield side. And then he says, we're also talking to Cardano dApps about how to upgrade. So if you're a Cardano person, when you first hear him say, we're talking to dozens of partners on the yield side, you think, oh, he's talking to the Cardano DeFi dApps, about how they can incorporate Bitcoin. And then in the next sentence, he says, we're also talking to the Cardano dApps. So he's talking about yield partners outside of Cardano. He's talking about bringing in yield use cases from outside of Cardano, which is fantastic. He's not leaving the Cardano dApps behind. He's also talking to them about how to upgrade to be part of all this, but he's also talking to yield use cases outside of Cardano. And he also mentioned, he just sort of listed, I believe Aave specifically, earlier on when he was saying, did you go talk to ARK? Did you go talk to A16Z? Did you go talk to Aave? He was listing the VCs he listed were the ones he just previously said he had gone and talked to as part of the Midnight Initiative. He didn't mention DeFi platforms outside of Cardano as part of that discussion. But then when he was sort of like, when he got excited and he was laying out that list of, did you go talk to blank? He listed some DeFi platforms, at least one. I remember specifically Aave. So I'm just saying the yield partners he's talking to, the dozens of yield partners he's talking to, there could be some surprising names in there. This could get real interesting, guys. Could get real interesting. And I would put those kind of in the DeFi degen category, not the compelling category. I think we really, as an ecosystem, we need to go for those really compelling things. We need to go for those really compelling, inspiring use cases. Like we all saw Charles make those microloans on his AMAs, and they weren't huge amounts. He says like something like 97% of them got paid back. Right. I don't know. I don't know what the yield was on those microloans, but if we could do something like that, that's compelling, super compelling, so people feel like they're doing a good thing and they're getting their yield, this could be the killer use case for Cardano. We've talked about the possibility of killer dApps in Cardano, and that's such a cliche term now. People cringe when they hear, killer in front of anything having to do with technology, but this could be such a thing for Cardano. Charles also said he doesn't care what bridge people use to get to Cardano, whether it's BOS or Sundial or something else. He just wants them in Cardano. He likened it to running a restaurant. You don't care if people took surface roads or interstates to get to your restaurant. You just want them at your restaurant. That seems to be how he feels about Bitcoin users coming over to Cardano. D Not You says that stream was long and pretty good as far as information shared about ADA. Yes, I agree with that strongly. If it didn't already have so much ADA, I'd be buying this dip up. Yeah, I think a lot of people are definitely doing that. So we now relying on an extended 5-year cycle. I've tried to convey over and over, especially for the last couple of weeks, however long I've been doing these live streams, the same thing I've always said since the beginning of my time in crypto. We don't know what the markets are going to do. No one knows. The Fibonaccios are all nonsense. No one knows. No Fibonacci is going to really tell you what the market's going to do. No one knows. It's a market. It's unpredictable. It's a wild beast. So we don't know. We don't know. Charles points out Bitcoin has 550 million users, 2.2 trillion in liquidity. It's bigger than all the rest of crypto combined. Think about that, 550 million users. I believe that's the number he cited. We're talking about 500 million users. This is an incredible, incredible number of users. So the upshot for me is I think this is how we get past that seemingly insurmountable chicken and egg problem. As I've discussed on previous evenings, we weren't the first movers in DeFi. We weren't the second movers in DeFi. We weren't the third movers in DeFi. We weren't even the first movers with smart contracts. We're just the first movers in extended UTXO. We need to play for our strengths. Go where you're treated well. Guess who's going to treat us well? Is it the EVM world? No, it is not. We already know that. They hate our guts. They hate us. A lot of people in the EVM world, the partisans of those blockchains, hate us. They hate us. They hate us passionately for no reason other than we are, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is we are wildly different. If EUTXO turns out to be the thing, if it turns out to be the play, if it's the play, then that means that EVM is not the play. So they have good reason to hate us because we are wildly different. And in that difference, we are the same as the biggest treasure trove of liquidity in all of crypto. That 2.2 trillion, 550 million users is sitting there. It has no expressiveness. It has no smart contracts. We are the UTXO blockchain. And not only that, we're EUTXO. We're the big hope for Bitcoin DeFi. They should hate us. They should hate us because we're the biggest threat. It's just that nobody sees it yet because we've all heard. I was in Bitcoin going back. I said this all the time just to give context, but going back to that 2012, 2013, 2014 period. And we've heard about all of the initiatives, all of the attempts to create greater expressiveness in Bitcoin. Fail, 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 fail. People have heard it so many times. They probably heard this and they're just like, well, I've heard this a million times. It never works out. This time it could work out. The reason they hate us could become well warranted this time. If this works, the EVM world should hate us. They should actually hate us if this works. Run 93 says, nope, Bitcoin and ETH will run in November. All its pump and cycle is done by February, March. A wizard told me that. We got a lot of wizards in crypto. We got a lot of wizards. We got a lot of wizards casting a lot of Fibonacci spells, and I don't believe a single damn one of them because, one of them is going to turn out to be right. On one day, on whatever day something big happens, one of the Fibonacci wizards will turn out to be right, but that's just because he's not one of the 9 out of 10 who was wrong, and then you've got all the guys who are like, it's going to go up or down or sideways. They're always going to be right. So, the wizards, you can't trust a wizard is what I'm saying. DeFi is too early on all blockchains as none of the tokens being traded have any actual real world value. Bitcoin is the first RWA of a sufficient font size to finally give DeFi real utility. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for There's a lot to be said for our overestimation of the maturity of DeFi. What is kind of sobering is thinking about how much bigger real finance is. The real world is so much bigger than crypto. It's crazy, just in dollar value. I mean, think about it. We've talked in this episode about how much bigger Bitcoin is than the rest of crypto. Guess what's way bigger than that? The real world. Real world finance is so much bigger. So I think your point is not lost. I think you make a pretty good point here. DeFi is this tiny niche thing engaged in by, I mean, a lot of us in crypto, but a lot of us are neck bearded basement dwelling dungeon masters also. So it's not really the gigantic thing that the real world is into. It's a very niche thing. It's a very niche neck bearded dungeon master thing. It's not the real world. Normal people are not DeFi degens. Those are crypto people. And let's face it, at this point, crypto people, we're not normal. We're not normal at all. I don't think anybody can claim that with a straight face. We are not normal mainstream people. Lovey2588. Hi, AOS. So glad to see you back. Your views are my views. And that is, thank you. Thank you for delegating to the DRep address. I appreciate that very much. Good to see you as well. Thank you so much. J. Marie. Okay, we have a little human coming in from J. Marie. I love it. At Rarivo, I spoke a bit with Charles, but asking for a sit down is very intimidating. Charles, though, one great thing about Charles is he does grant a lot of interviews. And I see him granting interviews even to, very small YouTubers sometimes. I think he's the kind of guy, I think he genuinely likes connecting with people. And I'll bet if you asked him next time you see him, I'll bet if you ask him to sit down with you and film something, I'll bet he'll do it. He seems to be very, very open to that. I think the real utility is the boring stuff, like actually acting like a bank, including transfer to TradFi. So yeah, let's talk about that. This is a great segue. Thank you. You kind of brought us back on track. So what is crypto? What was one of the greatest rallying cries of crypto ever? One of the greatest rallying cries of crypto ever was bank the unbanked. Let's bank the unbanked, right? And where did that seem to be a very where have we known since almost the beginning of Cardano that would be a very potent message? Well, we even have a name for it. We call it RealFi. And one of the places where RealFi in Cardano has been so focused. RealFi is kind of like the IOG term for all of this, but it's been Africa, the whole Africa story. At first, I mean, there was a lot about Atala Prism and identity and all those things that were going on with the government in Ethiopia, but also Seth Shepard says good night. Have a good sweet dreams, Seth. Hope you have a great sleep. Also, one of the things that we've always talked about with Africa was RealFi. It is this possibility of banking the unbanked in Africa. So here's a website I didn't know existed. This is the IOG RealFi website. I don't know the relationship between whatever entity is behind realfi.co and IOG, but if we come down here to meet the RealFi team, I don't know how many people have seen this. Oh, I recognize that team. We're a team of passionate entrepreneurs. We recognize that name. Look at the team. We recognize multiple people here. John O'Connor, Mr. IOG, RealFi Africa, and Dinah Patel. I'm sure they've spun whatever entities behind this current RealFi project. I'm sure it's been spun off from IOG or something. I don't think we need to speculate about the corporate relationship. But look at this. This is a substantial team of people just working on RealFi in Africa. And in fact, Charles mentioned this. So Charles said a lot of this Bitcoin DeFi stuff is going to start happening in 2026. He said they've been able to get Plutus and Aiken to compile to Bitcoin script. So you can use Cardano native tools to write Bitcoin smart contracts. That's already a technical reality. And we're going to start seeing things in the early part of 2026. And guess what? RealFi, he mentioned this website, realfi.co. RealFi in Africa is going to be a yield product for Bitcoin DeFi. So Charles and IOG, they already have ideas. They already have ideas that I think are going to end up being pretty compelling. You remember all those AMAs where John O'Connor would come on and give updates about Africa. It looks like this stuff is actually going to happen after all these years. And actually, it shouldn't be a surprise to get something so crazy like this going on, like RealFi, like actual banking of the unbanked. I'm assuming I don't know much about the current incarnation of RealFi, what it's going to be, but just based on what Charles said today and based on who's involved, John O'Connor, Dinal Patel, this looks like the today's incarnation of all those things we talked about in the past. Banking the unbanked. What is the best market for banking the unbanked? Well, you should go to some place where people don't have high penetration of banking relationships and has awesome demographics. Guess what place in the world that is? Pretty much one place, Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has lower banking penetration, very excellent demographics in parts of Africa. Demographics that are so much better than a lot of the global north. It's like laughable. That's Africa. It looks like this stuff might actually happen. We might actually see something out of all this RealFi stuff in Africa. So I think IOG has been thinking ahead on all this Bitcoin DeFi stuff for a long time. I think they've been thinking about how they can sort of bring all these disparate pieces together. Like Charles mentioned, which surprised me and probably everybody listening, that the Night token redemptions are going to utilize Hydra. When you get your Night tokens, it's going to be Hydra that you're using to get your Night tokens. It's going to be the infrastructure that allows them to do this crazy number of transactions where they deliver this drop to this crazy number of wallets. I think Charles said, those drops will cost like 20 grand to drop to all those millions of wallets because Hydra is so efficient. This is, I think, Cardano in the guise of IOG all these years. They saw all these things that were very interesting, like, oh, hey, we can do isomorphic state channels on an EUTXO blockchain much better than they can in the EVM world. So they built it, but it was sort of, a little bit of it was committing that cardinal sin, building out the product without a use case. Of course they had use cases in mind, but maybe not one as impactful as delivering the glacier drop to all of us via Hydra. I don't think anybody was thinking about that when they first, said the words like isomorphic state channel. Same thing with RealFi. Back in the day when we were talking about, all this bank the unbanked stuff and Ethiopia and the collaboration with the government before the civil war there, I don't think anybody was thinking, oh, RealFi is going to be a yield product. Okay, maybe somebody was, but that person much smarter than the rest of us, thinking that RealFi in Sub-Saharan Africa was going to be a yield product for Bitcoin DeFi. But this is the kind of like very compelling thing. Like, what sounds more compelling to you? Like, yeah, I'm going to go over and yield farm this like meme coin over, on this platform, and nobody actually cares about this particular asset, but the farming yields are really good. And then I'm going to take, my like, the tokens from there, and I'm going to put them into this other, yield platform, all that complicated DeFi stuff, all the crazy degen stuff. It's only compelling because of the gambling dopamine thing and the actual yield you get. You're not doing that and thinking to yourself like, oh, this is really good. Like putting, making a loan to this barber so that he can, do whatever. I have no idea what the use case related to this barbershop is. I haven't watched this video, but let's say there's a barbershop and this guy is going to you're going to make a loan. This guy's going to take that money and buy a bunch of equipment, which is going to make him into this flourishing barbershop. He's going to pay back the loan with interest. And you're like, hey, I helped out this barbershop. I helped out this guy and I got a yield. That's compelling. And the yield itself will draw people over from the Bitcoin ecosystem. I think this is the kind of stuff. Obviously, this is something that IOG has been thinking about for years, the whole RealFi initiative. But I think as an ecosystem, we all need to start sort of thinking about. I think we need to reorient ourselves, not towards, we can still keep doing all the, let's try to get a tier one stable coin. Let's try to do this. Let's try to have better marketing. Let's try to, kill the stigma against our eco. We could still do all that stuff. But I have this strange feeling that if we play our cards right, this can be so much bigger. The whole Bitcoin DeFi thing can be so huge. If we don't do it in that, kind of sad DeFi direction, if we don't do it in that whole direction, and instead we come up with compelling use cases that also provide a yield. I mean, think about it. Bitcoin holders, they haven't been involved in the degeneracy. They've just had Bitcoin and they haven't been able to do much with it. So they've kind of, been like that meme with the, the guys up on the balcony in the fancy, Renaissance style clothing, turning up their noses at the, the peasants down below. The Bitcoin holders have kind of been able to be that in terms of all the degeneracy that's been happening in DeFi and, to some extent, PFP NFTs and meme coins, all these trends, because it wasn't possible to do those things in Bitcoin. So they could just say, that's below us. We're in it for the cypherpunk ethos. But this kind of stuff is going to fit in with that. This is a perfect fit with where Bitcoiners have had to philosophically position themselves, because they haven't been able to be the DeFi degen guys. It hasn't been technically possible for them, really. I mean, you can argue, sure, they could have, wrapped Bitcoin in the EVM world, all those things, and that happened, but not to the extent we could make this happen on a UTXO chain, because we don't have to wrap those assets in the same way. Okay. He talked a lot about stables and even algo stables. However, he did not mention anything about stakeable stables. Wondering if that will eventually happen. Yeah, that's true. He didn't talk. He did talk about, his being pleased about Jed. Jed not really deep pegging, or at least he's talked about that recently. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more complexity we can build out in DeFi for sure. What I want us to do is build out that complexity with real world stuff. Let's bring crypto back to the real world. Enough of this digital degeneracy, right? I think it's great. Like when somebody's like really involved in DeFi and they figure out some new thing they can do in DeFi and they make a bunch of money because they were clever and they figured out something new. I think I'm impressed by that, like everybody else, right? And just the level of degeneracy is kind of impressive on its own. And that can keep going on in the background, but the mainstream is not going to accept that. They're not going to become the neck-bearded dungeon masters, because they're not. They're mainstream people. They don't want to become neck-bearded dungeon masters who just do DeFi degen stuff all day. They want to be in the real world. More and more humans are craving real world stuff, because the internet, something else Charles talked a lot about, the internet is becoming so full of AI and bots. The thing that there's an infinite supply of digital everything now because of AI and all the bots. The thing that humans are going to crave more and more is real world stuff. We can deliver that along with some yield for these Bitcoin DeFi users, these Bitcoiners. Okay. Milto21 says there are plenty of mainstream normal people in crypto. Otherwise, crypto would not be as widely adopted as some call usage. No, I agree. There are a bunch of I'm mainly making a joke. I'm trying to make it humorous so that to make the point. But yeah, there are a lot of normal people. I think especially in Cardano, there are probably more normal people in Cardano than there are in a lot of other ecosystems. And I think actually this channel, a lot more of the people who watch this channel are a lot more normal even than a lot of the Cardano, the wider Cardano community. So I think the people who watch this channel are pretty normal, actually. Okay, James. but they don't use DeFi and stuff and degen out. I mean, I'm sure they use DeFi, but I think he meant do degenerate things on dApps. Yeah, I think Bitcoiners are doing a lot less degenerate stuff. I think that's for sure true. Yeah, and I think this is it. I just had a discussion. The reason why this stream had to start a little late is I had a discussion with someone, and part of our discussion was that, I think we'll know that crypto has reached another level when very normal mainstream people are using it and they don't realize they're using crypto. It needs to be exactly like TradFi. You don't need to know how you're spending dollars in Central Asia. You don't need to know. Just being able to do it is enough. We will have succeeded when it's the same in crypto. Mission Zambia. Here in Zambia, small market vendors are beginning to use Bitcoin for commerce. I'll post a video on X with a vendor and tag you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, please do tag me. I would love to see this. We need to provide financial services to these people. Exactly. I think this is exactly what we need to do. This is going to be so much more compelling than the degeneracy. We need to do this. This is a great use case for crypto. And you know what? The senators who are our friends, the Congress people who like crypto, they're going to latch onto this and they're going to be happy to show the world. This is going to help us with regulation. If they see exactly what Mission Zambia is describing right here, if they see this going on, they can, prance out on the Senate floor and talk about this when the dragon is up there talking about how crypto is just full of criminals and degens, and I think she mainly just talks about criminals. I think mainly the anti-crypto army is just interested in our criminality, which by all measures is far less than cash. There's so much more criminality in cash than crypto for obvious reasons because our ledgers are transparent. Anyways, I think this is going to help us in so many ways. It's so much more compelling than the degeneracy. They are so hungry for it. Love to hear this. Bitboy versus Alex Pereira. Bro, you are coming up with the most lopsided possibilities ever. Like the lowest level. This is like, for those of you who don't know, Bitboy did fight. Did he fight once or twice in Karate Combat in the Crypto Influencer League? That was sort of a run by George from Cryptos R Us. Bitboy did fight in that. But you're talking about Alex Pereira, dude, the most feared striker in basically all of MMA right now. Some people will disagree with that, but Alex Pereira is a deadly precise striker. Bitboy versus Alex Pereira would be the biggest bloodbath ever. That's amazing. Just the thought of those two even being in the same room is like laughable. Interesting that Charles mentioned in the interview that they spent 3x the money on the Vegas event rather than Singapore. Yeah, that was kind of shocking to me. He said straight up, Token 2049 cost them a third of what Rare Evo cost. And at Rare Evo, I think he was happy to do Rare Evo, but he felt like it was just Cardano people hanging out with Cardano people. So I don't know how much that gets. That's probably important for us to build camaraderie amongst ourselves. But there's a totally different thing we need to do, and that's reach out to the larger crypto space, especially now we've got things like Midnight going on. And even more importantly, if we're going to kick off this Bitcoin DeFi thing. James, for people with empathy, I believe it would feel great to help someone and get a yield. Exactly. Isn't this what sold us on crypto in the first place? Long before anybody had heard what do we call it, an acronym? It's not quite an acronym, but abbreviation, kind of a weird abbreviation. Long before anybody had ever heard DeFi, it was the Satoshi white paper. Was the Satoshi white paper about anything if not freedom? I feel like the reason I'm in Cardano, the reason this channel exists is because Cardano, crypto and Cardano as maybe the best example within crypto, provides this glimmer of hope that we can deliver more freedom to people. I want more freedom for me, more freedom for all of you, more freedom for these merchants in these markets in places that have a low penetration of banking relationships, but in a lot of cases, and I've covered this on the channel, a shocking penetration of cell phone usage. This is how we can deliver that freedom. And it would feel great to the people who are getting the yield. They're going to feel a hell of a lot better getting that yield and knowing stuff like this is going on versus getting that yield through the neckbeard dungeon master degeneracy stuff, right? It's very plain. This is very self-evident. I've never been called normal before. See, I told you we're not normal. I'm going back on what I said a second ago. We're not normal. Did you happen to hear about the agent former Talos went live for like 68 a month trading? Talos, now that I think about it, Talos, I believe the Talos Twitter account used to comment on it. It was like set to comment on every single post I made for a while, very recently. But I don't know anything about what Talos is doing. I figured there was some way someone was going to be monetizing Talos. But, or maybe, I don't know if that's what you're describing. You said, did you happen to hear about the agent former Talos? So maybe this is somebody formerly related to that. I don't know exactly, but yeah, none of that would surprise me. Uncle Thanos, thank you for joining. Mission Zambia says, James, we at Mission Zambia Stake Pool, we help out orphans locally as we give you rewards in ADA. We're Mithril Signers, Midnight Ready, SSPO, 170 min pool fee and all that. Okay, yeah. It's good. Just putting out their info there. Ada Fox, I've got at least 15 people to invest in ADA, yet none of them participate in DeFi. It's a huge hurdle for most. Yeah, it's such a niche thing, right? Like it's a struggle to get people to. Here's why I've never been super excited about the more niche DeFi stuff. And I think, honestly, I think our definition of what's DeFi is going to change over the next couple of years because of stuff like this. We're probably what we call DeFi is going to change, but what we call DeFi now is so niche. It's so niche, and the technical hurdle, even explaining to people how an AMM works, the technical hurdle is so steep. The mainstream can't do it. It's not tailor-made for the mainstream, right? It's like if I explain to a 65-year-old mainstream person who's not a crypto person that they can make a loan to this barber right here, they're going to get that. They're going to totally understand what that is. They understand what small businesses are. Do they understand how pools work? Do they understand what being a liquidity provider in AMM is? No, they're never going to understand any of that stuff. This they'll understand. It's compelling. Okay. Yep. Vegas. You can spend money in Vegas. You can definitely spend money in Vegas. I've been a part of that many times. What should I do with my midnight? I assume you mean your night tokens. I don't know. That's a good question. The biggest question to me is, what is the value of the night token going to be? I think it's another one of those market things that none of us can really predict. Daniil, keep it safe. Yep. This is going to disappoint some people, but yes, I'm definitely going to make videos about aliens again. There will be more alien rumor rundowns. I wanted to really focus on Cardano. Since I emerged from the fiat mines, I knew people would complain if I immediately started making alien videos because there are some people very interested in that topic. And there are some other people who hate it. They hate that I make those videos. And I keep trying to tell those people like, hey, that's cool. You don't have to like those videos. Just don't watch them. Some of them cannot do that. They just cannot reconcile that I'm as enthusiastic about Cardano as I am and also interested in that topic. So anyways, I haven't made any yet, but yes, I'm definitely going to make some. I've lost none of my enthusiasm for that topic. I've lost none of it. I'm just as enthusiastic about that as ever. Yeah, a lot of people say that should be a different channel. I'm not really ready to have two different channels that I have to worry about. So there probably will be these little side episodes. I kind of think about it a little bit kind of like Rogan could have launched a totally different channel for all of the MMA discussion, even though the MMA discussion has been a part of his channel since the very start. Instead of launching a different channel and having one channel that's non-MMA and one that's MMA, he just has MMA episodes. So I kind of like that just because I don't have the bandwidth to manage multiple channels and do it well. So you might have to put up with a few Alien Rumor rundowns here and there. Just don't watch them, everybody. Anybody who doesn't watch them, just don't watch them. Serious question: when do you think the market structure bill will actually pass? So I've talked about this a little bit, Adam, in the previous nights. There's what we heard before the government shutdown and before the Senate Democrats offered their own take on sort of the Clarity Act, market structure bill, whatever name we want to slap on it. And I think before all that happened, we were hoping, hey, maybe it could even happen in October. And then as soon as the Democrat senators offered their own bill, I saw people estimating, maybe November is best case scenario. When will it actually pass? Will it pass? Nobody knows. Much like markets, I think nobody actually knows what's going to happen in the Senate. It already passed the House, and there was voting on both sides of the aisle for it, the Clarity Act. It went to the Senate, and I think it was Mark Warner. I don't know who else signed on to his version of the bill. His main concerns, because of the committees he's on, his main concerns, at least outwardly, are going to be national security related. So he's coming at it from that perspective, but he's a little bit of a latecomer to the crypto party. So I wish he just would have kind of kept that bill to himself and just let that thing run its course through the Senate, get passed like in the House. That's not what happened. So we don't know. Basically, nobody knows. It's like a market. Nobody knows when it'll pass. The Congress is much like markets in that it's totally unpredictable and, probably way more corrupt, but definitely unpredictable. Ada Fox, I love the UAP discussion. Do you listen to Ross Coulthart? Fascinating stuff. Ross Coulthart. I think it's hilarious when the guy on night shift, was it the guy on night shift or somebody else who described him as a professional Australian? I think that's hilarious. And it kind of does describe Ross Coulthart. So I love that Ross Coulthart was sort of like George Knapp, a non-UAP journalist who kind of came into the UAP world. And I love that he's so, in a weird way, even though he embraces this like very non-traditional topic, and he covers so much UAP stuff now. I love that he's like one of those old school, like kind of stiff journalists. It's like he speaks in the same way, like Tom Brokaw. Most of you probably don't even know who that is, but we had these anchors back in the day who would anchor like nightly news, sort of on a national level, and everybody in the US knew who you were talking about. That doesn't exist anymore because of the breakdown of traditional media. But Ross Coulthart is totally like this Australian version of that, but he's kind of like that stiff old journalist style. I kind of like that we have that. And then we have George Knapp, who's like the original UAP journalist who, is still a journalist this day covering totally non-UAP related stuff, but famously got involved in the Lazar thing and kind of broke that whole story. I think everybody who follows the topic knows about all that. We also have him. He's totally not the traditional Tom Brokaw guy, but he is like the seasoned veteran at covering all the UAP stuff. I like that we have a variety of people. Does Ross Coulthart, the recent video that he said, he kind of implied the recent video he debuted was going to be, groundbreaking. Was it groundbreaking, or did it look like a bunch of pixels from a 1980s Atari game? I would say the latter. I would say it was not groundbreaking. I would say it looked like I was playing a 1980s Atari game. And yes, I was, unlike many of you, I was alive then and did play those games. At Cardano, I had to help all the people I know who bought ADA to claim their midnight due to fear of DeFi chain activity. Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't claim because of fears of, airdrop fraud, like crypto has been rife with. So I think, yeah, a lot of people didn't claim due to those fears. So it's probably good you help those people. Uncle Thanos, how does sovereign identity gonna help if you are the one can show proof? If you are hospitalized or immobilized, how to show proof to show insurance, etc. So actually, Charles has addressed that exact topic. He says one of the use cases he thinks about is you are on vacation and you get into a car accident and you need to prove something about yourself and you've been incapacitated, you've been immobilized. How do you prove something about yourself if you can't, if you're not able to do it yourself? How can someone else do it? Well, I can't remember exactly the mechanism Charles described, but just brainstorming off the top of my head, this is crypto. So you could have all of that identity data about yourself. You go on vacation, you give somebody else the private key to some repository of that information, and they can then use that private key. They find out you were in an accident, you're immobilized, they need to prove something about you to some hospital in some foreign land, and they can then use that private key that you gave to them in case of just such an occurrence to prove that thing through zero knowledge proofs. They could even isolate, particular parts of that without actually producing the whole thing. They could prove certain things about you using zero knowledge proofs. So yeah, I think Charles is thinking about that already. Coast to Coast AM style. Yeah, dude. Coast to Coast AM was doing it before anybody had ever heard the name UAP. Coast to Coast was doing all that stuff. So, any thoughts on the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch? Is it fully dramatized or some real science going on there? So, this is one of those times when I can only tell you so many things. I can't say everything that's on my mind for reasons. But I know a thing or two about Skinwalker Ranch, and what I'll say about Skinwalker Ranch is Skinwalker Ranch was something. Skinwalker long before that TV show. Skinwalker Ranch. A lot of people. I'll put it this way: a lot of people knew about Skinwalker Ranch long before that TV show, and people. Now I'm getting the territory where I reveal a little bit too much here. I'll just put it this way. That's a reality show, and they're going to make it as watchable as they can. But Skinwalker Ranch, being a very, very weird place, was known way, way before that TV show was even a glimmer in the eye of the current owner. I'll just put it that way. Midnight claim over. I think not, right? Yeah, I think there's a few days left, right? I saw the sort of 6-day warning when there were only 6 days left, but I think we still have a few days left. Yep, Mark says, I think the drop has been extended till Sunday. At Cardano says 4 more days. Sounds about right. George Norrie and Art Bell, rest in power. George Norrie still around and kicking. Yeah, there's a lot. We'll have to do an ARR soon because a lot has happened since the last alien rumor rundown. So there's a lot to talk about, good and bad. Things have gotten a little stalled on the UAP disclosure front, but the level of interest in Congress has kind of never been higher. Have you claimed your midnight from BTC? Is it the same process? Okay, very interesting question. I said this the other night, but I have not claimed my midnight from my BTC. So I've had BTC for a long time, and I have a not insignificant amount. But the amount being offered for the BTC versus the amount I've already claimed for my ADA makes it kind of not worth investigating. Honestly, I haven't felt incentivized to actually go claim that amount from the BTC because it's like it's so much smaller than the amount I'm getting from the ADA that it's like not quite worth it's not quite worth going through the process because it's sort of like the amount from the ADA is so much that if the price of night is high enough, it's like the amount I get from the BTC is like such a small amount compared to the amount from the ADA that it hasn't been worth it yet. I kind of feel terrible saying that, but just being honest and transparent, that's the case. If you figure it out, let me know though. if you actually do it, let me know. Let me know what wallets you used and everything. Obviously, I keep my BTC on a hardware wallet. But I haven't touched it. I haven't touched it in a long, long time. So I'll admit, I'm hesitant to touch it. I'm hesitant to touch it over, the amount of night that's being offered. Really excited about night. I get that funny Spidey feeling. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The Spidey sense. Yeah, the Spidey sense. I guess we'll find out when we get our night and it hits the markets. We'll find out. I don't mean to be a pessimist, a cup half full kind of guy, but I think so much of it depends on where the larger crypto market is. It's like if it hits at the wrong time, the merits of midnight almost don't even matter. So I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I'm scared. I do get that Spidey sense you're talking about, but I also have this like fear sense that it could just hit at the wrong time, and that could have like a lasting impact on the valuations of midnight. Okay, here we go. Mark, thank you, Mark. Mark says I use Ledger Live for BTC. Same process, very simple. Yeah, there's some. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. I'm not going to go into my own sort of security process, but that is good to know. That is probably this. If I were going to do it, that's probably the same process I would go through. I won't comment any more than that, but S. Walker says so true. Yeah, the fear. Oh, you're talking about the Spidey sense that it's like things could get really exciting, and also maybe it hits the wrong time. It's like that's very concerning, right? Night Lambos. Let's go. Yep. Oh man, Night Lambos sounds great. I haven't heard or seen anybody write Night Lambos. This is the first time I've seen that, but I like the sounds of it. The market dynamics. Yeah. I've claimed Night on BTC, stored on Ledger, ETH on Hot Wallet. There were issues at the start, but they've sorted them out. Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. All right, guys, we have been going for an hour and 16 minutes. Hit me if you've got a last question. Hit me with those last questions. I really wanted to talk about this Bitcoin DeFi thing. I think this is going to be really important. This is a chance for us to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the crypto space. It's very tempting to engage in mimicry. It's very tempting to engage in mimicry and just do the same DeFi degen stuff, the same degeneracy we've seen, the same trends, ICOs, PFP NFTs, meme coins. Very tempting to just do what has proven itself to work in the past. We can do something novel and unique here. Let's do the compelling, inspiring stuff. Let's be that blockchain we always said we were going to be. Let's be that blockchain. Let's do the inspiring, compelling stuff. And if we can figure out how to add, whatever the amount is, whatever the marketable amount is, 5 to 10% yield for these Bitcoiners, let's do it. Let's be that inspiring, compelling chain that does the cool thing, the thing that everybody's going to embrace. Let's do that. James says, using my ledger to claim Night with Lace was so simple. That sounds good. For ADA, yep, I agree with that. I agree. I didn't use Lace, but I agree. Yeah, using any of the Cardano wallets was very good. Okay, any last questions? Hit me with any last questions, and I'll get everybody out of here. We've been going for an hour 18 now, so it's about high time we end this stream. But hit me with any last questions, and if there are no last questions, we will get out of here. I will be back tomorrow night at the regular time. Tomorrow night in North America, it'll be at the regular time. Today was a little bit late because of that meeting. I really wanted to hear what that person had to say, somebody within the Cardano ecosystem. But hey, thank you for joining at Cardano. I appreciate you joining. Great username also. All right, looks like I know there's a little bit of a delay. Uncle Thanos, thank you for jumping on. I appreciate it. Looks like we'll get out of here. Thank you so much for joining. I hope everybody has had a great week so far. We're kind of at the midpoint, depending on what part of the world you're in, but I hope the first half of your week was fantastic. Hope you're looking forward to a great rest of the week. and I will talk to you soon.